Federal agents have been tracking the Gypsy Joker Outlaw Motorcycle Club for more than a decade.
Behind me is the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club.
The Gypsy Joker Outlaw Motorcycle Club have been sentenced to life in federal prison.
People all over Australia were shocked when a story of payback came to light in Western Australia. It all began with a single gunshot in a small town of only 50 people. It finished with a car bomb that blew up everywhere and damaged dozens of homes. There were hours of darkness and quiet before a few gunshots broke the silence. The bikers ducked behind trees to try to figure out who was firing and why. Don Hancock, a 30-year veteran police officer, was at the heart of this storm. He was going up against the Gypsy Jokers, a famous biker gang that has been around since 1969. There were 65 kilograms of gold, a rifle with 51 bullets, and a bomb made from mine explosives that were all hidden in what used to be a teenager's coffin. 12 months of events from October 2000 to September 2001 killed 2 men and changed a town for good. What could make a well-liked police officer a suspect in a murder? How were the biker gang's plans for payback so well thought out? And why does justice still seem out of reach after a big public hearing with over 130 charges? Get ready to read a story where there are lots of drugs and lots of money, but that's not even the start. This is the story of the Hancock affair, a real crime that will make you question everything you thought you knew about how the law works in the outback. The Silver Fox, which was another name for Don Hancock, was a well-known name in Western Australia. Hancock was well-liked because his work was full of big cases, like the famous Perth Mint swindle in 1982, where he looked into the theft of 65 kilograms of gold. In 1994, he retired and moved to Ora Banda, a small town in the outback that was once a gold rush town and now has only about 50 people living there. He quickly became a major figure in the community. Hancock felt very linked to Ora Banda and thought of it as his turf because his family had roots there in the 1893 gold rush. His story of rise and fall took place here, in the dusty red dirt of Western Australia's gold fields. He owned a lot of the town through his business, Wentworth Holdings. This included the bar, a trailer park, a general store, and the historic Ora Banda Inn. It was even his land to hold gold, and he had a shack there with a .303 gun and a stash of bullets. So, in the middle of the outback, a story about revenge, power, and fuzzy lines of justice started. It's a story that Australians have thought about ever since. The small town of Ora Banda was full of life on October 1st, 2000. The Ora Banda Historical Inn was packed with tourists when Don Hancock and his wife Elizabeth got ready for a busy day. Everyone was getting ready to enjoy Australia's successful Olympics hosting on the sunny afternoon. The bar and beer garden were full of people. 2 police officers, Detective Senior Constable Shaw Gartland and Senior Sergeant Kim Gage, had driven over to see Hancock and were among the guests. The scene changed around noon when the roar of motorbikes filled the air. The Gypsy Jokers, a dangerous biker gang known for crime and violence, came into town. This wasn't just any biker gang. The Gypsy Jokers were one of the most feared and powerful criminal gangs in Australia. They had a bad image ever since they formed their first chapter in Melbourne in 1969. People from the Kwinana chapter, such as Slim Slater, Billy Grierson, and Sydney John Reed, were well known in this group. Hancock had never liked outlaw motorbike clubs because he thought they were full of criminal scumbags. Seeing the Gypsy Jokers at his business made him nervous. When the bikers started drinking, things quickly became tense. Once the Gypsy Jokers had a few beers, they got rowdy. One of them said something rude about a waiter who was Hancock's daughter. Hancock got mad and told them to be quiet. When they didn't leave, he told them to leave and closed the bar to make them. As night fell over Ora Banda, the stress that had been building up reached a peak. They set up camp close to where they were standing under a big flag with the name of their club. They kept drinking around a campfire. Billy Grierson was one of them, but he didn't know that it would be his last night. Around 7:45 p.m., a gunshot broke the quiet night. The bikers were startled at first and thought someone was chasing kangaroos, but after only 10 minutes, there was a second shot, and this time, it hit its mark. It was hit Billy Grierson and he started to bleed a lot. When the rest of the Gypsy Jokers saw that they were being attacked, they ran for cover. Later, Slater, who was there that night, said that the sniper was a bloody good shot. It was dark, and the gunman had hit them from 600 meters away. As the bikes rushed to get Grierson to help, chaos broke out. They quickly put him on a truck and drove to the Cause nickel mine, which was only 9 miles away. But by the time they got there, Grierson had already died from lack of blood. The Gypsy Jokers took off Grierson's biker coat, which had the club's patch and other symbols, such as Nazi symbols, to protect the club's image. He had a clip on his belt that looked like a Gypsy Joker patch. They took that and left his body behind. Things went badly that night, and a dark story of violence and payback began that would haunt the town and shake Australia as a whole. Don Hancock knew he was in danger after the very scary shooting. He packed up his things and moved to Perth, thinking that the distance would protect him from all the trouble and accusations that were going around. Not long after that, people began to suspect him. A lot of people quickly thought Hancock was the killer after he had a recent run-in with the Gypsy Jokers and a tough image as a former police officer. The sniper shot that killed Billy Grierson was powerful and strange. It came from a high-powered gun and was fired from about 300 meters away in almost total darkness. The sniper's shots were either meant to scare the bikes out of town or kill Grierson. No one knew for sure. No one has ever been charged with Grierson's murder, even though the case was looked into in great detail. The case, which has been called Operation Sandalwood, is still ongoing, but Hancock is still seen as the most likely suspect by many. As soon as the cops began their investigation, they ran into problems. Out of the 40 people who were around when Grierson was killed, only Hancock didn't have a good reason for not being where he was. When Senior Constable Dave Rupert questioned Hancock, he stayed cool but wouldn't say anything without his lawyer being there. A search on his computer showed that he had 3 guns and a shotgun, which made people even more suspicious. The claimed murder weapon, a .303 rifle, was never found though, which made an already tough case even more difficult. People in the small town of Ora Banda were divided as they thought about the chance that Hancock, a respected former police officer, might have been involved in such a violent act. Over the next few months, things got worse all over Western Australia, not just in the town. Police didn't say much about the case. They only said they were looking into everything. They talked to the 30 locals in depth and even muttered rumors of an inside job. At the same time, the Gypsy Jokers, who are known for being very loyal and having a strong sense of revenge, were not going to let one of their own be killed without a reaction. They were sure Hancock was the killer, but they wouldn't help the cops or the coroner's office. It was hard for Detective Jack Lee, who was brought in from Perth to lead the case, to show that Hancock was guilty. Hancock had already taken a shower and changed out of the clothes he wore when he closed the inn that night by the time the cops arrived at his house. He also wouldn't give up those clothes. Hancock agreed to talk to the police, but only if his lawyer was there. Even then, he demanded that all questions be written down ahead of time. Investigators had a hard time building a good case because he was cautious and wouldn't cooperate. There was also no physical evidence. The investigation went on for a long time because there was no solid evidence and Hancock stayed just out of reach. This put a shadow over everyone involved and hinted at a storm that was far from over. As the cops worked hard but couldn't make any progress in their investigation, rumors spread that Don Hancock may have used citrus juice to try to get rid of any gunshot residue. Citrus juice was thought to make it harder to find leftovers, so people thought he might have eaten an orange, but no one knew for sure if it worked. The cops were held up, but the Gypsy Jokers didn't wait around. On October 13, 2000, they got back at them by putting a bomb in the Ora Banda Historical Inn. Hancock's son Paul, who was running the business, was almost killed by the blast. An explosive device called power gel, PVC pipes, and a fuse were used to make the bomb. It was hidden in a coffin that was stolen from the grave of a young boy in Kalgoorlie. The attack on the inn took a lot of damage and showed that the Jokers were serious. That was not the end of the fighting. Not long after that, on November 1st, Slim Slater and Sid Snot Reed, 2 Jokers, tried to use Molotov cocktails to set fire to Hancock's Ora Banda house. Following that, on November 5th, they went back to Ora Banda to do more damage. They bombed Hancock's house, the gold mill, and the inn this time, doing a lot of damage. An ancient inn and a gold-crushing machine that was over 100 years old were both destroyed. By the end of it all, a lot of Ora Banda was in ruins. The public's anger was huge. The Premier and Police Commissioner of Western Australia said they would use unlimited resources to stop the Jokers from killing people. Even Grierson's sister spoke out against the violence and asked the police to find justice for her brother. The Gypsy Jokers weren't done yet, though. They found Hancock at his new home on Enfield Street in Lath Lane with the help of inside information from a Department of Transportation worker. Almost a year after Grierson's death, the Jokers finished their plan to get back at him. On September 1st, 2001, Hancock and his friend Lou Lewis went to the Belmont Racecourse for the day. They were having a normal afternoon at the races, with bets, beers, and laughs. But they had no idea that Sid Reed and another senior Joker were watching them all the time. The Jokers took advantage of the time as Hancock and Lewis left the races and went back to their car. Around 5:35 p.m., tragedy struck in a cruel last act of payback. As Lou Lewis pulled into Don Hancock's driveway, Sid Snot Reed of the Gypsy Jokers set off a powerful car bomb that went off under them. The strong blast shook the quiet street in Perth and killed Hancock and Lewis right away. Hancock's body was severed, with parts of his torso being blown into the garden. Lewis's body, on the other hand, was not broken, but its organs were destroyed by the force. Reed put the bomb under the passenger seat and then went back to a nearby parking lot to keep an eye on things. Around 5:30 p.m., Hancock and Lewis drove the short distance back to Hancock's house. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, the power gel went off. People living miles away could hear the explosion, and the street was a mess when first rescuers got there. Detective Stephen Brown later said that the crime scene was a total mess. There was trash on the lawns of dozens of homes and even on the streets next door. People in the area kept finding pieces of the wrecked car for weeks afterward. One electrical part was found stuck in a roof tile almost 400 meters away, which shows how strong the explosion was. People who lived close that afternoon couldn't believe what they saw and heard. The cruel deaths of Hancock and Lewis shocked people all over Western Australia and beyond. With their act of revenge, the Gypsy Jokers sent a scary message about how far they would go to get payback for their fallen comrade. This event led to a serious study that went deep into the world of illegal motorcycle clubs and tried to find out how far justice can go in Western Australia. After Don Hancock was killed, police in Western Australia began Operation Zircon, a huge investigation into the Gypsy Joker biker club that had never been done before. In modern Western Australia, attacks on police officers, whether they were working or retired, were very rare. This level of organized crime and retaliation was almost unheard of. Because so many people were upset about the crime and how bad it was, the government offered a then record prize of $500,000. This made the search for the criminals even more intense. The police quickly turned their attention to the Gypsy Jokers, especially in Perth. Raids on known clubs turned up illegal guns, cash, and large amounts of amphetamines. This led to over 130 charges, including major drug dealing cases. 3 kilograms of amphetamines and almost $363,000 in cash were found at the home of Gypsy Jokers Perth chapter head Len Kirby. This was one of the most important finds. A big step forward in the investigation was when Sid Snot Reed, a well-known member of the Gypsy Jokers, was arrested in Fremantle on drug charges that had nothing to do with the case. Detective John Jock Robertson, who was known for being honest and direct in his questions, went to Reed's house every day. In February 2002, after a long and intense questioning session, Reed admitted to setting the bomb that killed Hancock and named other Gypsy Jokers members, including Graham Slim Slater. Reed also said that Gary White, another Gypsy Joker, killed Anthony Tapley, a rival drug dealer. With Reed's statement, it looked like the person would be found guilty. In a secret court meeting, Reed admitted to killing 2 people. He was then given a life sentence with a minimum of 15 years in prison. His help was very important in putting other Gypsy Jokers members on trial. But the case against Slater was hard to understand. Reed's evidence showed that Slater was the mastermind behind Hancock's murder, but Slater's defense, led by Melbourne lawyer Colin Lovett, was strong. Slater's family told the judge that he was with them in Northam on the day of the murder, which gave him a good alibi. Even though phone records showed calls from Perth to Slater's wife's phone, the judges believed what his family said deeply. A damaging letter from Slater to a friend was also found. In it, he told the friend to lie and say that Reed had been kicked out of the Gypsy. On October 30th, 2003, Slater was found not guilty of killing Hancock because the jurors did not trust Reed's testimony. Hancock's family and a lot of people in the public were shocked and angry that there was no closure after the verdict. Elizabeth Hancock, who was married to Don Hancock, was especially upset about what happened. Even after all these years, Hancock's murder is still a scary part of Western Australia's past. It showed how powerful and violent illegal motorcycle gangs can be and changed the way the region deals with organized crime forever. Western Australia will always remember the story of Don Hancock's murder and the investigation that followed. It made people think deeply about justice, payback, and the nature of violence. People's ideas about police and illegal motorbike clubs were called into question by this case, which showed how thin and often unclear the line is between law enforcement and crime. Hancock used to be a well-known and respected police officer, but he became a controversial figure because he was remembered both as a law enforcement officer and as a cruel person. There were a lot of rumors about his honesty and his possible participation in violent crimes in the past. His legacy is as complicated as the man himself. Alistair Hope led the coroner's inquest into Billy Grierson's death in 2006, which concluded that he had been killed by persons unknown. Hancock was still the main suspect, but there wasn't enough proof to prove for sure that he was responsible for the crime. Many people, especially Grierson's family and friends, felt like they had no peace after this unresolved ending. Nicole Scarry, Grierson's partner, pushed for years for a public inquest because she wanted justice for her late partner and for their son Isaac, who was born after Grierson's death and never knew his father. The Gypsy Jokers had a grudge against Hancock, and it ended with a terrible car bombing that killed Hancock and his friend Lou Lewis. It was a horrible act that shocked the community and showed how powerful the club was. As a result of Operation Zircon, which was the police reaction, many people were arrested and found guilty of crimes like drug trafficking, arson, and illegal gun possession. Even with all of these efforts, the Gypsy Jokers were able to keep their power, showing how hard it is for cops to deal with groups that have a code of silence and loyalty. The effects were felt in Ora Banda, a small mining town that became famous overnight. In 2019, a fire destroyed the famous Ora Banda Inn, which was built during Western Australia's gold rush. This was the end of a time of violence. For those who lost loved ones in the blast, like Brad Lewis, whose father died in it, the pain and loss are still there. They are a reminder of how much people are willing to give to get revenge. Sid Snot. Reed got a shorter sentence of 15 years and special rights while he was in jail because he cooperated with the police. He was freed in 2018, which led to more discussion about how lightly he was treated. Graham Slater, another important person, was charged with setting fires but was not found guilty of Hancock's death. This cycle of violence, complicated laws, and unanswered questions has led to books, films, and the 2022 TV show Bicky Code, Murder, Revenge, and the Gypsy Jokers, which shows how interested people are in the case even now. In the end, the Hancock case is still a sad part of Australia's past. It's a story of revenge, flawed justice, and what happens when you break the law yourself. The sad stories of Hancock, Grierson, and the other people who were affected by the saga are a powerful warning of how violence can spread through families, communities, and even through society as a whole. The unanswered questions and ongoing pain show how dangerous it can be to seek revenge, even when the justice system fails.